Hi, Camila. Tell us what's going on.
Hey there, Doris. Good to talk to you. So we are at the plenary hall where votes are being counted from abroad. That began at 5 p.m., which is the same time that, of course, the polls closed. And in the departmental precincts, where each department will be counting each of their own respective votes, that will begin at 6 p.m. So that means that we are getting official votes coming in right now, which should be viewable on the website of the plurinational electoral organ, the O.A.S. And you should be able to see those digitalized, and we'll begin to see some official votes. These are binding because we're not seeing preliminary votes, of course, because that was scrapped yesterday.
I mean, you mentioned the votes being scrapped yesterday. What are people saying on the ground with this decision that was just announced out of thin air?
Some people are very happy with the decision. They say that it caused a lot of confusion, and that was, of course, the basis of the, the report that was put forth, the preliminary report and then the final report by the Organization of American States, led by this same delegation head this year, which said that there was fraud committed in the 2019 election. That, of course, has been disproven. And so a lot of people said that it is very confusing to have two different types of vote counting going, one that is non-binding and preliminary and non-official, and one that is official that comes out much later. It allows people to jump to conclusions when they see the first votes come in the initial hours. But a lot of people, including the M.A.S senators, the M.A.S Senate, led by Eva Copa, the president of the Senate, and also Evo Morales, denounced the move, saying that this shouldn't be something that should have happened last minute, because of course the president of the TSC has long said that this has been a proven system. They revamped that system of preliminary vote counting. And so why is it that we got this far with all these tests and now all of a sudden at the 11th hour they scrapped it?
I know you've had a very busy day. Has there been any reports of any sort of irregularities, any challenges? Because we did see some very long lines.
Yeah, I didn't see any long lines at all anywhere I went, actually. I've been to a whole lot of places in different municipalities and in and out of La Paz and El Alto. Even now, just walking into this building, I have not seen any of the, usually it's a school that's used as a polling station, and there were a lot of people. It was packed, but I wouldn't say that the lines were overly long. Those lines were moving, but I did see some troubles in other parts of the country, one of those parts being Cochabamba. And so there are some concerns about that. Obviously, there's some concerns about people, whether they are allowed to vote as well. So it's I've yet to see whether or not this is part of a larger pattern or whether it's, just kind of individual instances that we're seeing here and there because of the very thorough, hopefully, electoral observation, including by international observers throughout the country.
Now, as you mentioned international observers, has the presence of the Organization of American States, which we've reported several times, having been involved in the coup against Evo Morales last year, has their presence or the presence of electoral observers representing that organization created any sort of discomfort?
Yes, absolutely. There's a number of electoral missions here. There are independent electoral observers. And so I think there's some fear that those delegations, those missions, mostly four, but there are a couple of other, let's say three others that are here as guests of the de facto administration, that they are being prioritized, that they, that their reports, they'll be expected to submit preliminary reports in the coming days, that they will stick. They have more say than some of the other smaller delegations and some of those which are independent or from organizations which weren't here last year, that when they write their reports that it won't get a lot of media coverage and such as the one written by the O.A.S that took off last year.
Camila, what I would like to ask you is, because these elections are taking place amidst the pandemic, what sort of security protocols would you say were implemented, and do you think they would have been effective? And also, did they perhaps deter anyone from going to the polls?
I don't think anyone was deterred from going to the polls. There was a very high turnout. Of course, it's obligatory to vote here, but it seemed like a lot of people were very passionate about voting. It's something they've waited to do for a really long time. This vote has been postponed so many times. So as far as health protocols, I mean, the reality is that things were going back to normal. The de facto administration was trying as long as they could to postpone these elections, but once they realized that that wasn't going to go, they did, continue to reopen the economy as they had wanted to as well. And Bolivia is a country where there are mass markets. There are giant outdoor markets everywhere you go. They are merchants and they sell on the street. It's very densely populated in cities like La Paz and El Alto. And although people do wear masks and they do use alcohol and sanitize a lot of things in the day to day, it's really difficult to implement these sort of things. This is not a place where everything is sparse. And so at these polling stations, there were some that had hundreds of people at the same time, and people were not distanced. Of course, people want to just be the first one in and jump the line. So it's difficult to say whether or not the small precautionary measures they took, had any effect really.
Can this time be described sort of like the calm before the storm? Because we know that Luis Arce was leading in opinion polls, but at the same time, the de facto authorities have said that they would not allow a peaceful transition or allow any transition of power so long as the M.A.S were to win these elections.
Yeah, unfortunately, I do feel that people feel that way, that there is a lot of tension right now. It has been awfully calm today. It has been uneventful. That is, quite different from this time last year on this night when the election took place. That was Sunday, October 20th, 2019. I do believe that people are very tense. They're around their TVs, they're listening to their radios and listening for what the news is going to be. I think people might have a little bit more patience this time because we've heard time and time again that we need to wait for the official vote counts to come in, that some areas are going to take longer. But I believe that people are going to begin to talk to one another, and anxiety is going to boil over, and we'll see what happens and what the first official votes are. But unfortunately, there's plenty of time for things to go, Ari.
What sort of role do you think the international community should play, if any at all, in the ensuring that democracy really takes place in Bolivia? Because we saw Evo Morales having to flee the country and seek refuge, and this is a threat to the other M.A.S candidates that are participating in these polls.
I think all of us are observers. All of us are international observers. All of us have some sort of a role in the press and the narrative that's being told on social media. A lot of the false information that has been spread about Bolivia and about the election spread through social media and through people writing in their own individual blogs or going on talk shows. And someone's opinion online can go a really long way. So there's been a massive disinformation and propaganda campaign against the movement towards socialism and against the indigenous people and working class people, the basis of the movement towards socialism here in Bolivia. And I think that we all play a really important role in fighting the disinformation of agencies, mainstream agencies, news agencies like Reuters, AFP, some of the other European agencies that have a foothold here. They have tons of cameramen. They have tons of really large press teams here. Like teleSUR, for example, we always have consistently covered Bolivia, but we have less resources and smaller teams. These guys are promoting the coup, and there's a range of them here. The Economist, Bloomberg, the New York Times, Washington Post, they all have a presence here. So it's really important that everyone follow independent and alternative sources and really try to figure out what's going on here to combat that media war.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, you've been covering elections and you've been covering Latin America and Bolivia for quite some time. And you also mentioned that earlier, these proceedings have been quite uneventful. And we know that elections are set to take place very soon in Venezuela. What are your thoughts on the close proximity of these polls? Do you think that what is going to take place in Bolivia would pave the way for other elections in Latin America?
I think that Yeah, I think it's really unfortunate as well because in the same way that the de facto authorities allowed these organizations to come here, mostly the Organization of American States, there's a lot of pressure on the Venezuelan government to allow these NGOs for one, but for two, the Organization of American States and other non-trustworthy, non-independent, non-neutral bodies to come in and observe their elections. And of course, these are bodies and organizations which serve to intervene in the country. So Venezuela has been very they have really stood their ground in protecting their sovereignty when it comes to elections. They hold a lot of elections compared to other countries. And Venezuela, I've even heard here people say that Venezuela has had one of the best electoral systems around, and that this is a shining example for how an electoral system should be, and the ways in which this system here, which has proven to be a very good system for the most part. That it is modeled in the best of ways after Venezuela's system. So there's no need to have foreign interests come in and hijack those elections.
Also been in Bolivia yourself before, whether it would have been for work or for leisure. With Evo Morales leaving office forcefully, what is the difference now in terms of the economy? How bad has things been? Because we've seen the numbers, but you being on the ground, I'm sure you'd have a different take.
Yeah, things have been, I guess, a lot harder for people. It was just extremely hard during the lockdown, of course. I think people have really just been getting out in the last month or two, let's say, but after in the period following the blockades, things kind of fell apart. The blockades allowed the Bolivian people to pressure, through these mass actions that took place all across these mass coordinated actions, largely by unions, put pressure on the regime to restart the economy, and also they had to, guarantee these elections. So since then, people have been engaging in economic activities again. So it's been a very short period. So we'll have to see how things go in the next 2 months. Regardless of who wins this election, this de facto administration remains in power for the next 2 or so months because the handing over of power will be in December. And that's a concern in and of itself.
Most definitely, and an interesting point. On that note, though, we will take a short break, Camila, and we will touch back base with you to find out what's taking place in Bolivia. Thank you so much for joining us.